Hey guys, what's going on? Tyrauku here, and I hope you're all doing great. Today, I got an exciting video. So I'm going to be comparing two champions. One of them is probably my favorite champion in the game, or one of my favorite champions in the game. And no, it is not Stag Knight, though I do love Stag Knight, and I will be doing a video later on comparing him to another champion. But it's comparing one of my favorite champions to my current arena nuking champion. And these two champions, the reason why I'm even doing a comparison and not just outright saying, hey, this one's better than this one, is because I think there's very solid reasons to use both of these champions. And you may actually be surprised. One of these champions is actually significantly better if your account is more early, mid game, approaching late game than the other one. So definitely both of these champions are very viable. I'm gonna jump into these and compare them. And you guys can let me know down in the comments, what do you think about both of these champions? The champions we'll be comparing, obviously, if you've seen the thumbnail, you'll already know who the champions we're comparing is, but we're gonna do Ray versus Skullcrown. So a few things when we do these comparisons. So I did my Ray versus Biggin one. And I removed the accessories simply because the accessories could be very different between the two different factions. I mean, for Ray, for example, I do have her in an accuracy banner just to keep her speed tuned. And there's other stats that could be skewed. So I'm trying to make that as crystal clear, consistent as possible by using the exact same set on both of these champions. Because some of the accessories can definitely skew the results. I mean, if I have top tier rolls on a piece for Dark Elves, I'm going to use that on my Ray, right? So same thing for anybody. If you have amazing banner for, say, your Night Revenant, which I did for a long time, which is this banner right here, triple rolled speed attack banner, perfect for Skullcrown. However, my Ray does not have an attack banner. She has to use accuracy. Ray does benefit from accuracy, but she's just not going to have the same potential where my Skullcrown would as far as the nuking and the comparison. So to keep everything consistent, I'm going to use the exact same gear on both these champions. Now, for Ray, she is not going to have the same masteries as far as the support masteries. She's going to have offense and support, whereas Skullcrown is going to have offense and defense. We're mostly just worried about the offense tree right now. We do have Helm Smasher. I guess to keep things a little more consistent, technically it'd be better to go Flawless Execution because it's a consistent 20% damage increase, but Helm Smasher is solid and you're going to use this majority of the time. I mean, it's a 50% chance to proc. So we're not going to get huge variations between these champions, and we'll be able to tell when it procs versus when it doesn't activate. So we have the exact same masteries. Now, as far as a nuke champion goes, Skullcrown is going to have this retribution. Now, there's definitely arguments to be made for Ray to have these masteries, defense as well, and also running retribution, because her A1 ability does hit pretty hard, and you definitely want that extra damage if you can get it. But for the sake of this video, that's not going to matter because we're not going to be doing any counterattacks, but keep that in mind. That is beneficial to have on Ray if you do decide to use her. However, there is one downside to Ray, and I'll be showcasing this more later on, is she's very squishy, very low HP, very low defense. So in reality, if you ever get in a situation where this would actually activate, chances of her actually surviving for that to activate are very, very low. Whereas Skullcrown is essentially guaranteed because Skullcrown has this passive ability, which whenever this champion drops below 20% HP, she places an unkillable buff on herself, which means if she goes to 100% to below 20%, that retribution ability has a 50% chance to counterattack. So she's going to proc this very, very frequently, and this is going to play a huge role in why I think Skullcrown is significantly better, especially for earlier players as compared to Ray. Now, let's go ahead and look at their kits and compare them a little bit. So both of these champions I do have fully booked out. You can see with Ray, legendary books, obviously it's going to be a little bit more expensive to book out Ray because it is a legendary books. Legendary books aren't cheap. Skullcrown, all epic books, and they're definitely worth booking. I mean, you get extra damage, cooldown reduction. She's fully booked. These two abilities down here, definitely book them. This one's not super important because we're not going to be using her with Sinesha, but this is a very solid ability, very good ability, especially if you have Sinesha on the same team. It works as a res for Skullcrown, but their abilities are fully booked. Now, Ray's abilities, she has a decreased defense on her A1. It hits pretty hard. We'll go into the multipliers in just a few seconds, take a look at those, and then we'll jump into actually the Doom Tower because it's free. I don't got to use extra resources to keep refreshing it, and we'll use that, give it a little test, and then I'll go into the arena and kind of like compare them. It's going to be hard to test them actually in the arena because of all the variations that can happen, but I'll give a breakdown on why I think who is better for what different areas of the game. But we'll give a damage comparison in the Doom Tower. And I'll explain everything I do when we go into there. So attacks all enemies, hits pretty hard, decreased defense, has a reason to place accuracy on this champion. Not necessarily because of this ability, though. If this was the only ability that required accuracy, I would say don't even worry about building her with accuracy. But for A3, attacks all enemies, removes all buffs. This needs accuracy, has a 50% chance of placing freeze debuff for 1 turn. Also needs accuracy. So if you're using Ray as a strip champion, so stripping the enemy's buffs and the chance to place freeze, you're going to have to build her with some accuracy, which means you're likely going to be sacrificing some attack. In my case, I put an accuracy banner on her. That's the only accuracy stat she has extra, like specific accuracy piece, and that bumps her accuracy up to about the 200 range. So at that point, she's doing pretty good. She strips from most nuke champions in the arena. Most people don't run very much resistance on their nuke champions anyways, so I can strip them, have a chance to freeze them if I use that A3 ability, and it does typically strip the unkillable from Skullcrowns, because what it does is when it hits them, so it attacks the enemies first, and then it removes the buffs. So champions like Skullcrown, I believe it does it to Seeker as well. It'll attack, they proc their abilities, whether it's unkillable, whether it's increased defense, whatever it may be, they proc those abilities, and then she removes the buffs. So it works out very good, and then she freezes them. So she's a very, very good Skullcrown counter, and very good against Seeker as well. And I believe this may even work with Swift Parry. I'm not 100% sure about that though, but I would assume it does, especially if this ability would have killed the person. And this has a very good multiplier, and we'll jump into that in just a few minutes. Arcane Wave, this is where all of her damage comes from. Attacks all enemies, 50% extra damage against targets under debuffs. Obviously, if you're bringing a nuke champion, you're going to have decreased defense, you're going to have weaken, you're going to have some debuffs against the enemy, ideally. If not, you're probably not going to be using Ray to nuke, because her A2 ability does significantly less damage if she doesn't have a debuff on the enemy. Now for Skullcrown, her A1 ability places an extra hit if the target has more than 50% HP. So obviously, if they're above 50%, then she places 2 hits. Corrupting Touch attacks all enemies. This is where her big nuking potential is going to come from. This is where all of her damage really is focused around. This is an amazing ability. Attacks all enemies, has a 50% chance of placing 25% weaken debuff for 2 turns. Now, right off the bat, this seems like a mediocre ability until you look at the multipliers of this. This is a very, very solid ability. The weaken, I wouldn't even worry about that though. It's only 1 debuff, the only thing she really has. Don't even build her with accuracy. This is not going to be a champion guide per se, but I am going to go over a few little tips for the champions that you can build them and how to get the most out of them. And I can do a follow-up guide down the road if you guys want to see that. But then she has an aura, 23% in the arena. Great if you don't have a speed lead for the arena. Ray is 33% in dungeons. She is the fastest speed aura, I believe, period, especially in dungeons for sure. Very, very solid aura. But we're going to be talking about how much damage they can do. Now I'm going to use Ray and test her out, show her damage, and then we'll jump in and show Skullcrown with the exact same gear on. Before we do that, let me pull up this page right here. This is going to be comparing Ray to Skullcrown, their multipliers and their base stats. So Skullcrown has an extra 166 attack as compared to Ray, but she has 3 less crit damage. This, not a huge deal. This actually makes a significant difference. And we'll notice that once we swap Ray's gear to Skullcrown, because we make that switch, that 166 is going to really start shining, because all of your gear that's like plus 50% attack, plus 60% attack, whatever it is, that goes off of this number, not your overall attack. So it's 50% added on to 1509. It's 50% of 1509 for Skullcrown, 50% of 1343 for Ray. So definitely this does make a big difference, even this extra 166. Now, obviously, Skullcrown has less HP, less defense, less speed. So she's squishier. She's a little bit slower, not significantly, but it does make a difference, especially when you're trying to speed tune your champions. 10 less resistance, not a huge deal. Some people do build their Skullcrowns for resistance, or build them with some resistance, because she does place that unkillable buff, and the only weakness she has is getting it stripped, and then she just gets killed. So definitely, it can make sense to put some resistance on your Skullcrown, but in my case, I never do that. I'm not worried about that. Now, when we go into Doom Tower, what I want to do here is just showcase their damage with 1 hit, okay? So I'm going to show you how much damage they can do with just 1 hit from their abilities. I'm going to show Ray's A3 and then her A2 ability, just show both of those how much damage they do. Now, when I'm doing this, I'm not going to be able to show the end damage and take very much from that. The reason why is because how Raid's damage is calculated. Say, we're not going to go against this wave, actually. There's a different floor I just did a second ago. I think it's going to be a better comparison for this. But how Raid's damage is calculated is if you do overkill damage, it actually doesn't show on that end screen. So if I hit somebody with 200,000 damage, but they only have 100,000 HP, then it's only going to show that I did 100,000 damage, even though I hit them for 200,000. So what I'm going to do is just look at what they did, try to take an estimate. That's going to be a pretty good comparison. Ray is going to hit significantly harder on her A2 ability than Skullcrown. One thing to keep in mind here, though, is if we had any Force Affinity champions, they would be strong affinity against Ray. Same thing in the arena. You have the chance of weak hitting, which is not good. Obviously, if you weak hit on the enemy, then you do significantly less damage. If we don't kill anybody here, we can exit and see the damage. But if somebody dies, it's not going to be a good representation of the damage overall. So we use our A2 here. And okay, so Luria died, obviously. So we back out. We get a little bit of an idea here. We can see, because only one person did die. She did 401,000. So she definitely did a pretty solid amount of damage. 401,000, that's a good chunk of damage. Now, Skullcrown's not going to kill anybody when she does this. Let me open up a notepad real quick. Yeah, so I just opened up a notepad. We're going to keep track of some of the damage from Ray on this wave 66 of the Doom Tower. So we'll replay this, use her A3 ability real quick, and then we'll test her again with her A1. All right, so we use her A3. This shouldn't kill anybody. Perfect. So we back out. They got resisted because we didn't have enough accuracy anyways. 245 with her A2 or A3 ability. 245, A3, and then let's do her A1. And then we'll go in, switch Skullcrown's gear around into Ray's gear instead, and we'll see what Skullcrown can do. So her A1 ability, we are looking at a 120. So 120,000 damage on her A1. Let me go in here real quick, make a swap to Skullcrown, let Skullcrown use Ray's gear, and then we'll use Skullcrown to see what kind of damage she can do in the exact same way, floor 66 of Hard Doom Tower. So I'll be right back as soon as I get this gear swapped. Before I swap this gear, I just realized, let's show you Ray's stats. So we're looking at 3528 attack, 208% crit damage, all right? 3528, this is the main thing to remember, 3528. So let me swap these around, and then I'll be right back. All right, guys, so I'm back in here now with my Skullcrown. She just got switched into Ray's gear that Ray was wearing, and 3999. So we definitely obviously have a few 100-point jump in the attack. So Skullcrown's going to obviously have more attack than Ray. The crit damage is 3% less just because Ray has an extra 3% compared to Skullcrown. We're still at 99% crit rate, which is pretty ugly, but it should still give us a good comparison because we should land the crits, right? Like 99%. We're testing this 3 times. We should be perfectly fine, I hope. So 466, let's do a test to see what the differences are. Now, obviously, Helm Smasher could make a difference if we see some massive differences, whether that's Skullcrown doing a lot more damage or a lot less. In reality, they're not going to be hugely different. Now, I didn't show their multipliers. Let me go ahead and show their multipliers. I think I forgot to scroll down the rest of the way here. The multiplier is 4.3 for Skullcrown on her A2 ability, 4.3 on Arcane Wave. You're going to see this hits quite a bit harder for Ray as compared to Skullcrown. A1 of Skullcrown does hit harder, has a higher multiplier. She's void affinity as well, so she's never going to be weak affinity against anybody, so you're never going to get those weak hits. And then Ray's A3 has a very good multiplier at 5.3. So we'll go ahead and jump in here with Skullcrown and see how this works. Make double check to make sure this is my right one. 39.99, perfect. She has Savage gear on, looking great. So let's go ahead and see what Skullcrown's A2 ability does, and then I want to jump into what I think about which champion. So Skullcrown's A2, back out of this, 270,000 damage with her A2 ability, which Ray did 245,000 with her A3, and then she did 401,000 with her A2. So obviously Ray's A2 ability hits way harder than Skullcrown's, okay? Almost double as hard as Skullcrown's. Not quite double, but it's pretty close. It's a massive difference. Ray is an incredible nuker with her A2 ability. I'm going to try Skullcrown's A2 one more time to see what happens, just to make sure it's pretty consistent. 217 on her A1 ability. Get a double hit there. They all have above 50%, so get a double hit. If it only hit one time, it'd be about half of this damage, roundabout. I mean, obviously, you got 2 hits, take away one of those hits, then you got about half the damage. Pretty easy math, I guess. So 217,000 damage from the 1 hit, from the 2 hits from her A1 ability. We'll jump in here one more time, test out her A2, make sure it wasn't just a super lucky proc from Helm Smasher or anything like that. We'll back out. It did 270,000 the first time. Okay, 225,000 this time. We did 225, which is going to get a little bit closer to Ray's. So basically, their A3s, very, very comparable. You're going to have some Helm Smasher procs where it's quite a bit higher, some Health Smasher procs where it's quite a bit lower, but overall it's going to be about the same general ballpark, okay? So Skullcrown 225 here, Ray was 245 on her A3 ability, and then their A1 abilities, if it's only single hitting on the enemy, Skullcrown is going to do about the same amount of damage as Ray. So overall, Skullcrown and Ray's A1 and Ray's A3, Ray's A3 is comparable to Skullcrown's A2, and Skullcrown and Ray's A1s are both comparable. However, Ray's ability 2, her Arcane Wave, is significantly better than Skullcrown's, okay? So this is what I want to get into, and this is what I want to talk about, and kind of the big thing I want to hit home is that if you're building a champion, if you have the gear, if you have the increased attack, if you have the decreased defense, if you have the buff removal to get rid of the shield buffs, if you have all that stuff, Ray is by far the best one-turn nuker when it comes to Ray versus Skullcrown. If you're looking for a one-turn nuker, get rid of the enemy, go with Ray. However, if you're finding yourself having a very hard time against Force Affinity champions, if you're finding yourself not being able to one-shot the enemy, if you're finding yourself, going slower than the enemy, anything like that, go with Skullcrown. Skullcrown, when it comes to the arena, is amazing, all right? So, where Ray is basically a one hit and then it's done because she does the one hit, if she survives, then she's probably getting killed the next turn. If she doesn't survive, well, if she survives and doesn't kill the enemy, she's probably gonna get hit. If she survives and does kill the enemy, you win. Great. But in the case she gets hit, it messes the matchup completely, and it's not a very good situation. Whereas Skullcrown, if you use her A2 ability, if you have her speed tuned and you go first, use her A2 ability, boom, that's one hit. The enemy takes her turn, they get her down to below 20% HP, she procs this passive ability, next turn she gets another turn, assuming she's not stunned, slept, feared, or anything like that. If you run the mastery, that is, she has a chance to remove a debuff whenever she loses 25% more or more of her HP. It's a very solid debuff or very solid mastery to run. But if you run that, it has a chance to remove those crowd control effects that would stop Skullcrown from doing that extra damage. But keep in mind, so you had that first turn, Corrupting Touch, okay? So you took your first turn, the enemy takes their turn, they hit you, they drops her below 20% HP. She does get her counterattack, so boom, you get a counterattack, A1 ability is used, they're probably below 50% HP, so you're only going to hit them once, but that's perfectly fine. It's also going to be reduced damage because whenever you counterattack, I believe it does 50% less damage versus just a regular hit. Whether it's, except for Avenging Gear. Avenging Gear does do the full damage, but that's the only thing. So if you're counterattacking from Retribution, you're going to do less damage, but you already got 2 hits, okay? So you have the first from the A2, second one from the counterattack, and then, assuming you did not get crowd controlled, you come back to your turn again, whether your entire team is dead or not, it doesn't matter, and then boom, your Skullcrown uses the A1 again, so then she has another hit on all the enemies. So you're looking at a potential of 3 hits, very, very predictable, very, very consistent, assuming your Skullcrown is not crowd controlled, locked out, or anything like that. Very, very good when you can hit the enemy 3 times versus Ray, she only hits him once. So if you're finding yourself having a hard time, whether it's one-shotting enemies in the arena, whether it's going first, Skullcrown is going to be the girl for you if you're looking for an arena nuker to really help you out with progression. If you have her, she's an amazing champion. I think she'll do great for you for a long time. She's a lot less, strict when it comes to the gear you need because she can get away with taking extra turns, whereas Ray needs that one turn and she needs to absolutely just kill the enemy. Now, when it comes to dungeons, who is better, Ray or Skullcrown? I think I'm gonna have to give it to Ray in this one because Ray has the benefit, except for areas where it's Force Affinity, like Fire Knight. She's not very good on Fire Knight. You kind of want to keep her away from Force Affinities, but as far as wave clear in dungeons, she does bring a freeze. This is very good because you only need about 200 accuracy for this to actually land on stage 20 of the dungeons, which is perfect. You're removing the buffs, which the enemies typically don't have very many buffs anyways, but you're removing those if they do have some, and then you're placing the freeze. Freeze is a little annoying because you do deal less damage to targets under freeze, but you're freezing the enemy, giving a good crowd control. Her A2 ability absolutely demolishes enemies, it'll wipe them out. It's amazing. So as far as dungeons, she also brings the speed aura, which is very, very good. As far as dungeons and areas like that, I think Ray does win out slightly if you build her with a little bit of accuracy as well. Because she has that extra crowd control, she brings a little bit more utility, I guess you could say. Whereas Skullcrown is more so for the arena. Don't get me wrong, she's amazing in dungeons, and I used her for a long time and everywhere. All my dungeon teams she was in, because she can absolutely do work on the waves, and she's void affinity. This is a huge deal because she's never weak against any affinity. So you can bring her on Fire Knight. Not amazing. She does have a 2-hit on her A1 if the Fire Knight's above 50% HP, so that's very, very good. But she doesn't have like anything incredible she brings extra. If you build her to apply the weaken, she could do that, but I definitely wouldn't recommend building her to do this weaken because it takes away from her overall nuking ability and nuking potential. So that is my comparison to Ray versus Skullcrown. Neither of these champions should be used in clan boss. I'm not even going to talk about clan boss because if you're using these champions in clan boss, you're probably missing a lot of potential damage. Faction wars, they're different factions, so you're going to use them wherever. When it comes to campaign farming, I would say they're both very, very comparable. They're both going to one-shot every wave. They're going to be about 7 to 8 second farmers, I believe. So every other area, they're pretty comparable. But as far as arena, keep that in mind. If you're a lower player, I definitely think Skullcrown's going to beat out Ray, especially if you have a hard time one-shotting the enemy, though Ray can do a lot of damage. But if you're coming against a lot of Razens, a lot of Rector Drats, a lot of Mountain Kings, Force Affinity champions who are tanky, Ray is going to struggle. She's going to have a hard time. And being a weak champion, as far as like a squishy champion, once the enemy gets their turn, Ray is probably going to be targeted, and she's probably going to be absolutely destroyed. Whereas Skullcrown has a fighting chance even after she does all of her damage at the very first. She gets a potential of I'd say a fairly consistent 3 hits every time she fights in the arena. A very consistent 2 hits, because the third one would be from the counterattack retribution. But the first 2, if you go first, you get the corrupting touch. If you have the unkillable applied and you don't get any stun, sleep, fear applied to you, you'll take another turn, do the A1, it's perfect. Obviously, you can get your buff stripped as well, and then it's kind of a bad situation also. But ideally, Skullcrown typically takes 2 turns. Easier on offense because you can control which enemy goes and pick your teams wisely. Whereas if she's on your defense team, people can bring different champions who mitigate Skullcrown's effectiveness, but you can't stop everything, right? So guys, let me know what you think about these kind of videos. Do you like these comparison videos like this? I do plan to do some more on support type champions, maybe other types of champions. Definitely leave it down below who you would like me to compare, and I'll be more than happy to get onto that. And other than that, guys, thank you all very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll catch you in the next one.